everyone. My name is Sarah Call. I am the Travel and Tourism Research Association Administrative Assistant. Welcome to today's webinar, Vacation Rentals, Airbnb, Greed, or a Community Catalyst, with TTRA partner Arrivalist, powered by AirDNA. Today, we welcome Cree, Bram, and Megan as they outline how they followed their data in the short-term rental space and where it may be headed. Friendly reminder that TTRA is getting ready for our Marketing Outlook Forum. It's right around the corner starting January 29th through the 31st. If you are looking to register or want to learn more, you are welcome to check out more at our website at marketingoutlookforum.com. And then just another reminder that we are using the Zoom webinar platform today. So please feel free to drop any questions you have in the Q&A section, and we will try to get to as many as we can by the end of the session. I would like to hand this over now to Cree, Bram, and Megan.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for a lovely introduction. Okay, Cree's going to queue up the presentation right now. But we just wanted to say thank you for everyone joining us. There is a lot of action-packed slides ahead, a lot of good content, and data points. But we know that with all webinars, people might be multitasking. So Cree, if you could put the presentation slide to slide number 2. So to give you the lay of the land of what we're going to talk about today, so you can make sure that you perk up your ears to listen to the part that you're really interested in, Cree's going to drive into about 20 minutes talking about short-term rentals. We're going to get the inside scoop from him on how Arrivalist's data and his relationship with AirDNA led to the merger that was announced this summer. And then just talk a lot about how some of us in the tourism world need to shake off our pre-notions of short-term rentals and start to understand how they're really a catalyst for our tourism communities. Then we're going to take a little pause, about 10 minutes, and take inspiration from the Mythbusters game. We've got some fun myths about short-term rentals. And we'll go back and forth and have a nice interactive conversation around that. And then Bram is going to close out with 20 minutes giving us a peek into the 2024 forecast for next year. So we are right around the corner to the new year, and he's got some great predictions to share. And we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. But if you'd like to ask your questions along the way, I promise to keep an eye on the questions box. So without further ado, Cree Larson, kick it off.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about something completely different, something brand new for me, hopefully brand new for you. Long story short, I've been getting a lot of questions, and I thought I would take the opportunity to give you some answers. This has been an exploratory process for me, and it's been a long path from basic familiarity with vacation rentals to where we are now as part of a vacation rental company. And it's been a really informative and exciting journey. And I value the opportunity to talk about some of my thinking, some of my discoveries. And a lot of people have asked me straight up, Cree, why hitch your wagon to the vacation rental star? And I'm going to answer some of this. Some of this data is going to be surprising for you, I hope. Others less so. So one of my operating theories about great data has always been that great data is the intersection of what's vital to making decisions and what's volatile. In other words, changing every day. Because you can have great data sets that are vital, but don't change that much, so you don't need to look at them that often. And you can have great data sets that are volatile, but who cares? They're just fun to watch the little line scribble here or there. And what fundamentally drove me is I looked out a decade from now, what are our clients going to need? What type of data sets are our clients going to need? I think the data we will all need is that combination of what's vital and what's volatile. And there's a lot of, you can try to be everything to everyone, but we decided to double down on those assets, those digital assets, those data assets that we thought would be the intersection of volatility and vitality. Now, I started getting a lot of questions about why join up with a vacation rental company. And then, to make matters worse, the Airbnb bust thing happened. And YouTube started coming up with videos like this, spreading a lot of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt about Airbnb bust. Are they going away? Are they blowing up? And you have two no better people to ask those questions on the phone, on the computer here today than myself and Bram. And the rumors are greatly exaggerated. What you need to know is, from a journalist perspective, if it bleeds, it leads. And YouTube during this period of time had cut their rates for content creators, and content creators, in order to make the same amount of money, had to generate more views. And how do you generate more views but with more and more sensational headlines? And I'm not saying there hasn't been a change in vacation rentals and Airbnbs, but not to the extent that you would read about in the market. Certainly, we're not seeing such crazy changes as some of these videos would have you think, that the entire housing community is going to fall apart, or the commercial or the residential real estate market's going to fall apart because all these homes can't make it as vacation rentals. So don't believe the hype. So when in doubt, zoom out and start thinking about the bigger question. So why sell Arrivalist into this market? And the number one reason is that AirDNA has the same passion for trusted and trustworthy data that we do. And in order to, there are four surprising reasons, things I've learned along my path, that make this data far more interesting than you might think. The number one reason is vacation rentals are the agile lodging answer to a changing world. And if you kind of think about this, this is going to resonate, and I'll give you some background on that. Short-term rentals are adding authenticity to the overnight experience that we didn't have before. I would argue that vacation rental revenue goes to your market, staying with the people who own the homes in the market, versus through your market back to the corporate coffers of chain-owned, chain-managed hotels. And then number four, and this is what matters for our clients, is by working together, Arrivalist and AirDNA, we're going to be able to project forward, not just look backward, project forward at what you can expect to see in your overnight economy. And Bram's going to give you a sneak peek of some of that that's coming up later on in this presentation. But before I jump in, I want to challenge some prevailing notions. It wouldn't be me if I weren't asking some hard questions. And I think there's a lot of written stories about the boom, the bust of vacation rentals. What nobody's really talking about is what's going on in the hotel market. Now, if you believe the projections that everybody's coming out with, then we're just going to slide right through this. Discretionary spending is going to help us have a soft landing, get through the economy. But as we're budgeting for next year, I think we need to be a little more circumspect. I think we owe it to ourselves to take a different look at the world. And when I think of people who give me a different perspective, I think of Joel Ross. So I went ahead and I signed up for a newsletter. I don't remember ever paying for a newsletter, but I signed up for a newsletter. And the reason I did that is because you won't find this guy online. He's not on YouTube. But this guy successfully predicted the hotel crisis of 2008 and 2009. Nearly got kicked out of the Hotel Data Conference for predicting it. And then the next year it all came true. So if you ever want a flip side picture, the other side, then Joel Ross is a pretty good place to go for that. So seeing as how he charges for his newsletter, I reached out to him and asked for permission to share the kind of data I'm sharing with you here. And he doubled down. He said, yes, a recession, it's a matter of timing, not weather. Why is that? It's because savings are gone, according to the banks. Credit cards are maxed out for many. The pin-up to desire to travel is about spent. 60% or so are living paycheck to paycheck. And while inflation is tapered, real inflation, what you and I pay when we go to the grocery store, when we fill up with gas, that's really much higher than it ever was at the beginning of the pandemic. To get to the chase, he says if the job market falters, the hotel business will tank. And that's the first time he said that since 2008. So I just want to give an alternative perspective. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I do think as we go into budgeting season, we need to think about, really think about where the economy is heading and make sure that our plans are are prepared for something like that. When in doubt, zoom out. And I know this looks like a picture of like a a naughty picture or something like that. But the bottom line is real estate and travel have been awkward bedfellows for a long, long time. And the essential tension between real estate and travel is who gets the good bits of your destination? The residents get it? Do we keep all the nice parts for the residents and keep them sequestered over there? Or do the tourists get it? And there's an essential tension here that's kind of part of any community. Any thriving community is going to have an offering for tourists and for residents. The problem, and what has been happening since the pandemic and is actually getting worse, I would dare say not better, is that the good bits have changed. The good bits of a destination might have been your downtown areas before. But now, with so much crime in the downtown areas, many cities, there are fewer and fewer tourists going to the downtown areas. Where they're going out to the suburbs, they're going out to the cities and the urban places. Now, you may just think this is a conjecture, Cree being Cree, but AirDNA data validates this. In fact, 50% of the growth in vacation rentals is in small city, rural, and suburban. This is lodging going to the good bits before they can build a big box there. This is a responsive, agile adaptation to changing places, changing communities. This is vacation rentals, which can pop up in a few months instead of waiting a few years for hotels to come in and join an area. So it's that agile part of your overnight economy. So where do travelers go now? If we don't want, the vacation rentals can be taken anywhere. Now, you might not want to stay in a mini house. I actually stayed in one of these. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty amazing. But this is what my point is, that vacation rental inventory is agile inventory. And this has changed. I'm just going to rattle off. I've given you the context and the broad picture. I want to give you some numbers to back all this up. Since 2020, we've seen a seismic shift. 60% of people prefer short-term rentals, according to data gathered by AirDNA. STR guests, vacation rental guests, spend 140% more in the community than hotel guests. You've also got folks who are working while they're staying in vacation rentals, and you've got unique stays. They get added a layer of authenticity to the stay. Now, why should you care? 24 cents of every dollar spent on lodging now coming from vacation rentals. Whether you tax it or not, that's 24 cents of your overnight economy is going to vacation rentals. There's been 300% growth in short-term rental revenue since COVID-19, 35% stay in non-traditional tourist destinations, and of course, bigger places are more popular as well. But it's this last one that's the kicker. 50 states now tax vacation rentals. I actually showed this slide to Brad Dean at Puerto Rico, who confirmed that our 51st state, Puerto Rico, also taxes vacation rentals. Now, not all the cities, counties, not all the, not everywhere in the state taxes them. I suspect it's more like 35% that tax vacation rentals. And that number is just going to grow. Now, here in America, we have this we're passionate about taxation. And there's one thing that we really believe in very deeply here in America, and that is no taxation without representation, right? The Boston Tea Party. And if we're going to be collecting money from vacation rentals, you better believe they're going to be on the boards soon. They're going to make themselves known. They're going to ask for representation because that's just how it works here. So when we built Arrivalist Lodging, we were looking for a data set that could be the referee between the needs of these respective groups. The vacation rental group over here, newly taxed, the hotel group over here, more entrenched, and really our vision was to allow data to be the referee so that you can make the right calls between those two. But as we pointed out, vacation rentals are adding authenticity to the overnight experience. And if you read the headlines, hotels are countering. Hotels are adding authenticity as well, right? hotels are really knocking it out of the park and catching up and providing more authentic things too. Like this thing I found at a hotel most recently. I mean, what could be more authentic than that? 3 shampoo bottles mounted on the wall. They're branded. Clearly, they sold branding on these, but can anybody find the shampoo? Um, anyway, this is a tongue-in-cheek way of saying that no, hotels are not adding authenticity to the overnight experience. But ever since I've worked with DMOs and destinations and tourism boards, everyone has tried to find what's authentic about their place. And they focus on daytime activities, what to do when you get there. But I don't think anybody's thinking about what can we add, what layer of authenticity can we add to the overnight experience, to the overnight economy. And I think that's where there's a big room for opportunity. STR spending is STR guests spend more and stay longer. It's not a surprise. And then, as I mentioned before, I think it's dangerous when we say, oh, Airbnb is making tons of money off of us, or VRBO or Expedia, they're making tons of money off vacation rentals. Literally, they're only taking cents on the dollar, 13 to 15% of every transaction. The rest is going to entrepreneurs in the neighborhood who bought houses and turned them into vacation rentals. So it's a thriving entrepreneurial community in your community that's taking out loans from your local banks, that's sending people to local grocery stores, that's really having much more of an outsized impact on spending in the community. And so why does it, again, when I come back down to it, why does this transaction make sense for us? Because it makes sense for you as clients, as our clients. And it helps us to bring more vital data and more volatile data, not just and give you guys the most actionable data that you need in the market. And the final reason, what we're excited about bringing these two companies together is that it's going to give you projections like the kind that Bram is going to show in just a minute. But before we do that, we've got some myths to bust. So I'll go over to you, Megan.
Great. Okay. Awesome. Well, we're doing great on time. You are right at that 20-minute mark, Cree. So we're going to take 10 minutes and do a little interactive few slides inspired by Mythbusters. So without further ado, let's get to myth number 1.
Oh, me.
Thanks, Cree. Okay, so myth number 1 about short-term rentals is that, yeah, it's all great. All the DMOs out there, just, we understand what you're saying, Cree, but a lot of vendors that report on short-term rentals are screen scraping their data. And this tactic could go away at any time. So is it true or false? Is it a myth that screen scraping data could go away at any time and this will not be relevant to us anymore? Cree, what do you think on that?
I got to say, I was honestly worried about this because you would think the premise is that, well, how valuable could data be from a screen be from screen scraping be? What is screen scraping? You hire a bunch of bots to go take all the information off a particular web page, organize it, categorize it, put it in a stack database, and move on, and et cetera. And I thought, wow, how sustainable could that be? Because presumably, if you run a website, that's the last thing you want is bots coming and taking your data. What I've found out, two things happened. One, there was a very high Court of Appeals case, which said that if anything is posted on a website, it can be repurposed as long as that information is posted publicly. But that doesn't take care of the whole thing, because what if the company Airbnb doesn't want to be scraped in the first place? Well, I was kind of put at ease in that regard when I found out that the AirDNA data, not only does Airbnb allow them to scrape the site, they actually take the data back from the AirDNA site. So AirDNA is not only a complicit partner, but they're actually users of the data. And so, long story short, screen scraping for vacation rental data, it's not going away anytime soon.
Great. Great. Let's go to myth number 2, which I think everyone's going to really resonate with, because if you've been living under a rock, you've seen a lot of news and reports coming out on myth two. So, Cree, can you forward to two? So, regulation. There's tons of regulation happening right now. And the myth that we're trying to bust is, will it just shut down short-term rental business outright? So, Bram, I would love your thoughts on this, and especially since you've been tracking it so closely. Is this myth true or false?
Right. Yeah. So regulation shutting down the short-term rental business, I think this is false. Now, that's not to say that regulation won't shut down some short-term rentals, and we've certainly seen that. I think New York is the big example that is making the rounds in the news today because of new enforcement. Now, I should point out too that those laws had been on the books previously, and New York is not the only city in the U.S. or in the world to enact regulations. However, that's just kind of the most popular one. And we did see a reduction in about 14% during the same month when they started enforcing those rules. But what we see here is these regulations are often put in place by larger urban areas, and that's why they get a lot of I guess a lot of press in an effort to address in most lately housing affordability. So, previously they had been put into place because they said, oh, these short-term rentals are going to have lots of crime and outrageous parties, and they're going to trash the neighborhood. And they noticed that this wasn't happening. In fact, this was making neighborhoods making them more livable. They were drawing in extra money and economic benefits, and were actually increasing values of homes. So now that they're saying, oh, well, this is going to be driving the value too much, so we have to get rid of it. But the fact of the matter is, when we look at housing affordability and the factors that affect that in the U.S., there's very, very limited reach that short-term rental regulation is going to have. Cities are going to be experiencing that if they enact sharp legislation or regulation, and they already have, I should point out too. So many cities in the U.S. have already instituted lots of regulation. There's San Francisco comes to mind, Boston, and these places are seeing their supply of short-term rentals increase, not as quickly as some other places, but increase nonetheless over the last few years. And I should also point out the most quickly growing portion of short-term rentals are in rural and small town areas. So out of the way places that don't have a lot of hotels are underserved by the hotel industry, but have, great experiences for people that want to travel there and are really excited about the economic benefits there. And there's much, much less push for regulation in those areas.
Awesome. Awesome response. Cree, did you have anything you wanted to chime in on this myth?
Yeah, what's happened here is these short-term rental owners were easy prey at the beginning because they weren't organized, and you could just enact whatever above them. But really, all this has galvanized the group, the short-term rental owners, so that now they can put up a formidable front when this kind of regulation is contemplated in the future. And so I think in the future, you're going to see a lot more pushback on initiatives like this.
Cool. Good insights. Cree, forward us forward to myth three, which this myth is hitting on. The reason you get into the short-term rental business is to really make money, right? And I'm sure of the people that are listening to us right now, like myself, I keep an eye on my local market to snatch up a rental that maybe I could become rich on. So the thought is, what if there's not enough cash flow to make this really worth it? Like, are people going to keep investing in short-term rentals if the cash flow isn't there? So Cree, how about you chime in and let me know Bram. Bram, you tell me what you think about cash flow and the short-term rental market.
I'm sure Cree will come in too when the time is right. We did see really, really outsized big performance in 2021. So there was a bunch of factors that led to that. Pent-up demand we've talked about that quite a bit. The fact that hotels had not reopened as widely in 21 led to sort of a shortage of supply as well. And performance was incredible. And we heard stories of people pitching tents in their backyard and renting on Airbnb and making lots and lots of money. And sure, You know, there's probably not going to be enough cash flow in your backyard tent now to sustain that short-term rentals, but it's still interesting to see the short-term rentals existed prior to the pandemic, and they were growing very, very quickly. And even now, after the pandemic, we've seen occupancies go back to sort of long-run averages, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. But it's much more normalized, but we're still seeing a lot of interest. So you know, annual increase to available listings in 2023 about 12.8%, demand up 6.8%. So a lot of people, I think, are still finding that this market is very interesting. It is very doable, and you know, some I think maybe less interested, less engaged, more sort of flippant players might be washed out now that the money's not flowing as readily as Scrooge McDuck would be able to swim in it, but it is still very much an alive business.
Okay, for those of us listening with small backyards like myself, we will not be disappointed that we are not in the game then. So, Cree, I'm going to switch to myth 4, and I'm going to throw this one at you. So, so for myth 4, is the short-term rental market oversaturated? It feels like you see Airbnbs everywhere. Is the market at its capacity?
Gosh, I love to just throw down the truth and walk away and leave it there on the table. But the answer to this is a more cautious, it depends on the market. Some markets are indeed saturated. I think they've been widely reported. I think a lot of people have talked about some of the Outer Banks, some of Myrtle Beach. We all know that some places in the mountains where prices are falling because there's a glut of supply. That said, but that's what's beautiful about this is that it's an agile overnight economy. And if you've got too many, then it's kind of a self-correcting problem in that, you know, those vacation rental owners might sell there and buy elsewhere. Not that they wouldn't endure some kind of pain to do that, but that's a lot easier than having a big box on a hill and nobody to put in it, or nobody that wants to go there. So it depends on the market, and it's a self-correcting problem.
Great.
Right, you know,
Bram, do you have anything else to chime in?
well, I was going to go, you know, this kind of ties in with the previous myth as well. We were talking about 25% ROI. You know, if you had gone and bought a house to rent out on the short-term rental market, and you've noticed the performance drop, as Cree says, you know, one of the nice things is that you're left with a home that can be sold. Now, right now, maybe the market is, you know, not the greatest for home sales, but you know, generally residential homes, they appreciate pretty well and they hold their value, unlike, you know, a obsolete commercial real estate project such as a hotel that is no longer needed or no longer in a sort of a hospitable environment for it. So that's another thing that I really like about the short-term rental market is just the agile supply there, that it can switch, and that these assets, they don't become worthless just because they may be in a saturated STR market.
And if you've had a good market, that person staying at your place has been helping you pay down your mortgage. So there is some benefit to that for sure. Great. Well,
You've got both. You've got asset appreciation and the cash flow. So you can hardly go wrong.
For sure. For sure. Okay, let's move on to the next myth. People are going back to hotels. So it's no denying anyone that's representing a destination marketing organization out there, the pandemic was rough and hotels took a hit, but they're a staple in our industry. And so this myth really gets back to people are going back to hotels and actually prefer hotels to stay. So Bram, I'd love your thoughts on this. Do you think this is true? Mythbuster.
Of course it's true. Yeah, of course people are going back to hotels. You know, we've definitely seen hotels increase their demand. But the other part of this myth is that we're implying that people are going back to hotels in place of short-term rentals, but that's not necessarily the case. Now, hotels are really good at what hotels do. They can provide, a very uniform, regular product. They're really good at serving, densely populated areas. They're great for business meetings and that sort of thing. But short-term rentals have their own niche. One, there are the fastest growth segment, and where we see a lot of new short-term rentals is in these small town and rural areas where there just aren't hotels. So people are really exploring a lot of places in America that maybe that they hadn't had the ability to explore before, and hotels are just not an option in those places. So uh, uh, there is that, and of course you've got medium-term stays, which short-term rentals are extremely good at. People that are traveling for work, people that are working remotely. So that's an interesting use case for short-term rentals that is different from hotels. And of course, if you've got a big group, we all know that renting a 5-bedroom house is quite a bit different experience than renting five rooms next to each other at a hotel. And I think that now that people have had that experience, they've really enjoyed it. We know that ratings and customer satisfaction from short-term rentals is very high. And I think they're going to continue going to those experiences. So are people going back to hotels? Yes, of course they're going back to hotels because hotels have been with us for a long time, and I think we'll continue, of course, to see hotels. There's no reason to think that they're going away, but people are also still going to short-term rentals as well.
Great. And then taking us into the last myth, myth number 6 is the impression is that the short-term rental market is owned by a bunch of individuals out there that own and rent out their properties. They might have like 1, 2, maybe even a dozen rental properties in their portfolio, but it's not really a game that the big guys have gone into. So Cree, is this a true myth or false?
This is false. Vacation rental industry is all grown up, now. And we've had big companies like BlackRock and TPG and a lot of these fund managers who've been have not had a lot of opportunities to invest in the market that are going in specifically to mid-size homes, not your mansions, not your multifamily units, but a lot of private equity firms are actively buying single-family homes in attractive areas, and with the stated goal of converting those to vacation rentals. So, it's kind of the professionals are moving into the space a little bit. It's not just a mom and pop's industry.
Great. Great. Well, good responses. That wraps us up with the Mythbusters section. But since we're trying to change up your thinking about short-term rentals, I want to challenge anyone that's listening. If you've got a myth, please put it in the chat. And at the end of this presentation, we would like to bust or praise your myth. So add your own myths so we can do that at the end. But for now, we're going to turn it over to Bram, who's going to give us a sneak peek into the 2024 forecast, which is literally the new year is around the corner. So Bram, let us take it away. We're going to take 20 minutes and deep dive into some really good data and slides.
Well, sure thing. And thanks for the intro to that. So I don't know if it was mentioned in the intro, but I'm an economist with AirDNA. I work really closely with the VP of Research and Chief Economist, Jamie Lane, and he and I have been preparing our end of the year 2024 Outlook report. We just gave it to the copy editing office. It should be published, we hope, on Tuesday. But it'll give a sort of a deeper look into all of these things. But nevertheless, certainly forecasting is in or is on the top of my mind. It's certainly in vogue right now as we approach the new year. So if we go to the next slide. First, I want to typify, what the environment is that we're looking at here in 2023. So what are the things that we're going to use to build up to a forecast? So one of those is definitely the supply growth that we've seen in the U.S. over the last 2 years. So in 2022, we saw this enormous surge of new supply into the short-term rental industry, I think directly in response to that incredible performance that we saw in 2021. Now, if you look at the dotted line, that's our pre-COVID trend, and we're actually starting to approach it. We're actually accelerating supply so fast. We're catching up with the lost few years that we had with the pandemic there, with the declines that we saw in supply. This is very different than, say, what's going on in Europe or in other places, but in the U.S., we're trying to get back there. Another 300,000 additional listings. And what I thought was very, very interesting was in September and October, we saw growth to the available listings. We usually don't see that. Almost always the additional listings growth occurs at the beginning of the year to take advantage of the summer travel season. So what's going on? Let's look at the next slide. So what has been going on? So this is telling us, I think, why we saw a really big boom in 2022, to some extent why that continued into 2023, and why we might expect 2024 supply to be a bit slower or to slow down significantly from where we have been. So if you look here, this is an important metric that we track. The monthly STR revenue is that blue line over there. And if you were to take out a mortgage on a new house with prevailing rates, with the median home price, what would your typical mortgage payment be? That's the orange line on the bottom. Those orange bars are essentially the difference between the two, and you can see that those reached a maximum in 2021. So that was that incredible performance boost that we've heard so much about. Since then, we know the Federal Reserve has been increasing interest rates very rapidly, perhaps the most rapidly that they've ever increased them, in an effort to control inflation, which reached a peak at the end of 2022. So near about 10%. So very, very high inflation rates that I haven't seen personally since I was a very, very small kid, and wasn't really concerned about inflation very much. But that has been pinching the gap between these two, right? It's been pulling them together because we know that that supply increase has been decreasing per unit performance just a little bit through the occupancy rate. So that blue line is coming down off of its peak. Still, I should point out, noticeably higher than it was pre-pandemic, but coming off that peak, and at the same time rapidly moving up as that mortgage payment. So there is a lag effect. So this big gap in 2021 caused a huge surge in supply in 2022. And then as the gap narrowed, we saw smaller increases in 2023. It continues to narrow. Now it's at its smallest point yet. So we're expecting supply to slow down even further in 2024. And this is already underway. If we'll go to the next slide, we can see that new listing growth.
I'm having a problem here. Hold on.
All right, well, new listing growth. Yeah, that's what this is. This is year over year new listing growth. So we track which listings are new and which ones are just sort of staying into the market or returning after a seasonal break. So this is the number of new listings. You can see the year over year growth, incredible growth in 2022. So 60-70% higher than the year before, the number of new listings. So this was tons and tons of people entering the market in 2022 to sort of cash in on that really big outsized performance that we just saw. We've noticed, though, that it's definitely been slowing this year. So all the new listings month after month are less than they were in the previous year since March. Now, it's still greater than the number of listings we saw in 2021, sure. And in some cases, greater than the amount of new listings we saw in 2018 or pre-pandemic, 2019. But nevertheless, this is some very clear evidence that we see that supply growth that has been affecting per unit performance is definitely slowing, and it's slowing at an increasing rate. So that is something to look forward to if you're a current host right now. We'll see what happens next year. We just heard from the Fed that they're pretty enthusiastic about the way that inflation has been acting. We may even see some rate cuts next year, maybe even more than one. So we'll see what happens to that. But nevertheless, we believe that supply and demand growth are now achieving a new balance. If we go on to the next slide, we can see the occupancy here. So the ratio of the two really spiked during 2021. That's that huge outsized 2021 once in a lifetime performance. Even the tent in the backyard is getting rented out. And you can see there, it's probably not going to get back up there. You know, short-term rentals as a market, their natural occupancy or their regular long-term average occupancy was a little bit lower than hotels because of that really flexible supply. But you did see that really big spike. And the supply that we've seen enter the market since then has caused it to, year after year, month after month, diminish back to that 2018, 2019 average of about 55%. And this makes a lot of sense when we think about how occupancy works, right? If you've got incredible performance, you're attracting new people into the market, and that's going to tend to lower occupancy. Once it gets back to this long run occupancy, there's no huge premium, so there's not an excitement or an excessive draw for new entrants to come in. And now it's time for the most competent, capable operators to sort of take over. And this is more of a normal market that we're seeing, a normal environment. So we're expecting to see that occupancy now to just fluctuate around that long run average as a result. So the pandemic gains in occupancy have been erased. You've seen that the difference between the mortgage payment and the revenue is now pinched to the smallest level that we've seen. And new listings have also started to diminish, and they're diminishing at an increasing rate. So we're definitely expecting supply to slow down next year and be more commensurate with demand. Because if we have supply and demand balanced, then our occupancy is going to stay the same. We're going to continue having this sort of long run average. So if you move on to the next slide, that's informed our opinions of the forecast in 2024 performance. Now here, I would like to point out that we have seen that occupancy decline, and we've seen occupancy decline since its high in 2021, though we have seen per unit performance decline. It's not an Airbnb bust in the sense that we're seeing people flee the market and not want to stay at short-term rentals. Well, we've actually seen demand increase pretty good this year, 6.8% in 2023. Now, it's a little bit lower, certainly, than we've seen in the years past. We aren't recovering from pandemic lows, of course, but we have seen demand increase, and we've seen demand increase across most markets. So 42 of the top 50 markets that we track in the US. And if we look at some of these ones with the large decreases, like, wow, well, Cape Coral, Fort Myers, nobody wants to go there. Well, people do want to go there, but Hurricane Ian had other plans, and it struck in October of 2022, and they are still recovering. Maui, of course, with very serious wildfires. So that's the reason why its demand has gone down. And there's been Hurricane Idalia too, which threatened Orlando and Lakeland during some of the peak season as well. So we're expecting in 2024 that the demand for these markets, where even though it has gone down this year, is going to be recovering or in a recovery mode as we move into 2024. And in fact, 48 out of the 50 top markets, we expect to see demand growth. The two exceptions to that would be New York City, because of those regulations that they are enforcing now, that is going to be restricting supply. So it is also going to be hampering the total demand that can occur. Now, if you will notice, not everybody's upset about those regulations. All the hosts in Jersey City and Newark, New Jersey, on the far left here, seeing great windfall from that, because you can book a short-term rental in Newark, and you can take public transit into the city, and so that has become a attractive and affordable option for people wanting to visit New York City. But that is one of them. And Maui, too, we also expect is going to be continuing to recover from those wildfires, even as we go into most of next year. So it will not have totally recovered its demand. But for the most part, we are expecting pretty good demand. In fact, somewhat stronger demand in 2024 growth than we saw in 2023. We'll move on to the next slide.
Hey, Bram, I was going to chime in. You're fine. I was going to chime in just because people are asking questions. So one, just to reiterate, given the diminishing supply and occupancy normalizing, we're forecasting higher RevPARs in 2024? Is that what you're saying?
We are forecasting higher RevPARs, not necessarily on occupancy, but rate is going to get a little bit of a bump. So what we saw, and I'll talk about rate in just a bit, but what we saw at the beginning of this year was those record high inflation rates. We had economists constantly telling us that we were going to be in recession any minute now. Everything was going to fall apart. It never materialized. But in the meantime, a lot of us were very worried about our budgets because food, rent was much more expensive than it had been previously, and we were afraid we might lose our jobs in the middle of the year. But moving into 2024, it seems that we have largely sidestepped any kind of possibility of recession. Oxford Economics, for example, constantly predicting recession throughout the year, but this last quarter forecast that they've got has no recession, just a slight slowdown for the beginning of 2024, end of 2023. In fact, we're supposedly in it right now, as consumer spending is going to be slowing a little bit this holiday season compared to those in years past. However, that a much better economic footing that we're on, that more certainty that we have in the future, and the fact that wage growth is now starting to exceed inflation, which is very, very handy for your average household, coupled with the fact that we have very high employment rates and we know employed people need to take those vacations, we think that we're going to have a bit stronger demand growth and a little bit of pricing power, not too much, but about 2% in ADR growth over the next year, and that will lead us to positive RevPAR, thank goodness, in 2024. This slide here, all I wanted to do is point out that declining occupancies are not a demand phenomenon. They are a supply phenomenon. So if we were to run changes to occupancy versus change to demand, we don't get much of a relationship at all. However, when we plot it out with supply, we do get a negative relationship. That is to say, if you had a lot of supply, it's more likely that you had lower occupancy. So almost all of the markets increase their demand. They also increase their supply. And in fact, they increase their supply by a larger amount than their demand. And that is why we're seeing declining occupancy. So if we move on to the next slide, this also something we've been tracking when we're thinking about rates. We noticed when we looked at the aggregate rates, so the average of all the rates of short-term rentals that are in the market, and that's this dark blue line, ADR, we noticed that they've been negative over the year. But my friend Mark Moreno, very great data scientist, he's been working with Jamie Lane too on what they might call the Lane-Moreno index. But it's actually a Case-Shiller type repeat rent index. So what we do is we look at just short-term rentals that have been in the market for an extended period. So what we call the same store sample. And what this does is if we look at just these groups of short-term rentals, we can take out the effect of mix shift. And once we take that out, we see that ADR has actually been pretty flat this year. That is to say, if you had a short-term rental in 2022, then you probably kept the price about the same in 2023 on average. So why are ADRs in aggregate going down? It's because the new supply that's coming in is generally being lower priced than the existing supply, and that's dragging the average down. In 2024, we expect both of these to go back up. There is going to be, again, that additional pricing power, and we think that the mix is kind of done shifting, as it were, and that those should, I think, much better, there'll be a much better match, the ADR and what we call the repeat rent index moving into the future. If we go on to the next slide, and there are some economic factors to think about this. Just, we've got a lot of graphs here, but just to say that Oxford thinks that even Oxford thinks that we are not going to be having a recession. It's just going to be very, very slow growth for 2 out of the 4 quarters of next year. But one big change, if you look over here, is mortgage rates are going to continue to remain high. I'm going to try to see, what that forecast looks like as the Fed develops its strategy. But this is going to continue putting that pinch on supply as we go into 2024. And again, a little boost in demand that we're going to see from the economy improving and the outlook improving, and a little bit drawdown in supply because of those reasons I talked about, the performance and the expense of buying new homes. Those are going to help to achieve that balance, and we're going to continue seeing long-run occupancies in the range of 55%. If we go on to the next slide, something that we use to predict the future is forward pacing. It's a pretty good method for looking at a couple months ahead, 3 months ahead. Not so great looking a year from now, but what we have seen is a couple things, trends that we were expecting that are actually borne out. Now, you can't see it here, but we did see definite higher interest in shoulder month rentals. Blistering heat wave in August. Demand growth there was a little bit weaker than we would have liked, but September and October had really good demand growth, perhaps from people getting out of that searing heat, or maybe because that inflation has really put such a dampener on their budgets, they're looking for low rates in the off season. In any case, if we look December, January, those months are right now tracking about 6 to 4%, so a little bit higher than last year. But they really start to grow in 2024. So what that tells me is that maybe people just recently, now that we have gotten a little bit better handle on what the economy is doing, maybe they have started to extend their planning horizon. So that's a very important. If we move on to the next slide, because it has been a definite difficulty in forecasting this last year, is booking lead times have been shrinking. And I attribute this directly to economic uncertainty. When we are uncertain about what's going to happen in the future, our planning horizon draws in. Therefore, we're going to wait a little bit of extra time before we put down our money or deposit for the vacation that we're going to be taking. In fact, on an entire week in 2023 compared to 2022, in 2022 was already a shorter lead time than 21, which was already a shorter lead time than 2019. So you see where this is going. So that pacing does give me a little bit of hope that maybe people are starting to look towards January, February, March, the new year, starting to make plans to maybe visit friends, maybe have business trips, and starting to extend that planning period out because we're getting a little bit more certainty in the economy. We're feeling a little bit more comfortable with how things are going to play out. If we move on to the next slide, something else that is going to help our demand is international travel. International travel, if we look back at the beginning of 2023, we had very, very high inflation rates. And you know who else had really high inflation rates was Europe, even higher than in the US. We saw a very strong dollar. The dollar almost reached parity, or actually, I think it did reach parity with the euro for a little bit at the end of 2022. So it was cheap to schedule your European vacation, maybe even cheaper to visit the Riviera than to visit the Panhandle. So we saw a lot of people in the US take trips out into Europe, and we didn't see as many Europeans travel to the US. So even though foreign trips, they saw a bigger growth rate than domestic trips, the balance of the two, if you look at the domestic foreign balance of the two, was a net drag on US tourism. If we go forward a little bit, Eurozone inflation has just dropped down to 2.9, which is a little bit lower than US inflation. Exchange rates have normalized much. They're much closer to historical averages than they were, say, just 6 months or a year ago. And we expect, too, that Europeans, they waited a little bit longer to lift restrictions, and as a result, they were a little more hesitant to start traveling abroad. We think that's going to be helped out by a little bit more time in 2024 as well. If we visit the next slide or go to the next slide, we'll see some predictions about our industry outlook. Again, 6.7, this is probably going to be the low point in demand growth, and a lot of that has to do, again, with those economic anxieties. We also saw supply growth. It has slowed down markedly in 2023, and it continues to slow. We can expect it to slow again in 2024. So when I say achieve balance, that reduction in the supply, and we're going to boost up the demand just a little bit. Nothing crazy, but we're going from 6.7 to above 10%, and we should achieve balance. Our occupancy will stop declining, and it's going to land closer to this long run average of around 55% pre-pandemic performance. Our ADR is going to have a little bit more power now that we've got wages increasing faster than the inflation rate, and as a result, RevPAR, which did actually, this is the entirety of the Airbnb bust right here, negative 4.9%. Not a cataclysmic or, catastrophic, disastrous dip in RevPAR, but, we don't like to see that negative sign. And happily, it's going to be back to positive in 2024. All right, we move on to the next slide. To go to locations, depending on where you're at, you might have a little bit of different mileage one way or the other. One of the big divisions that we've seen this year is the difference between leisure and urban. Leisure had a more difficult year this year than urban did, which is, the reverse of some of the previous years that we've had. Urban markets grew greater than about 8%. In demand, whereas coastal and mountain grew at smaller amounts, about half of that, or even 50% lower than that for mountain regions. If we go on to the next slide, we can see, though, this is going to flip a little bit. Now, we've got some spaghetti going on here, but if you look at that dark gray line, that is the urban market. I made it gray and gritty, like the sidewalks of the big city streets. And it started out the year with some of the highest, fastest growth rates. And the reason for that is that the recovery in urban had been delayed a little bit because of, I think, pandemic concerns. And of course, restrictions that lasted a little bit longer in urban areas compared to other places. So it was still in a kind of a recovery mode in 2022 and 23, but we've seen it rapidly decline its demand growth. Now that is going to lighten up a little bit by about the middle of 2024. But on the other hand, and this is a trailing 12-month average, on the other hand, we've already starting to see some acceleration in some in demand and pacing for those leisure markets, which had a weak year. If you'll notice, the destination resort, mountains and lakes and coastals, the red and blue line, having a weaker 2023, but we're already starting to see that acceleration occur. So we think that by the end of 2024, leisure markets are going to again be growing faster than urban markets. Small town, rural, and mid-sized city still by far and away going to be the fastest growing. Now they're only about a quarter of the total demand right there in those smaller markets. So a smaller portion, but it's going to be increasing that share. Urban markets, again, they're picking up, urban locations, they're picking up midway between 2024. So we'll start to see that gray line bend back up after the end of 2024. All right, if we'll go to the next slide. Something interesting too that we are paying close attention to is rate compression. So either extremes of the rate spectrum, if you'll notice in the middle, if you had a very low-priced hotel, you were able to raise your prices quite a bit faster. If you had a very high-priced, I'm sorry, not hotel, but short-term rental, though similar effect may be happening in the hotel market. But if you had a low-price short-term rental, you were able to raise rates very, very quickly. On the other hand, if you had an expensive short-term rental, you were lowering rates. So in essence, we were kind of compressing the rates to sort of one friendly rate. And that makes sense. People were looking for value in 2023. So there was an increase in demand for budget and economy short-term rentals, and people were moving away from upscale and luxury to try to save some money. So that is something that we've seen in 2023. That's impacted our RevPAR. So, we have a diminishment in RevPAR, and that was chiefly on the higher end, if you'll notice. Occupancies down pretty close to even around the entire price spectrum there, but the differences in ADR cause differences in RevPAR growth depending on the pricing of your short-term rental. All right, moving on to the next slide. One last thing I want to point out about forecasts is that nothing is certain when we're talking about the future, and that's one of the ways that we deal with that ambiguity is through scenarios. This dark blue is the baseline scenario for GDP, and again, we think it's not going to enter a recession on the baseline scenario, but it will slow down a little bit. An upside scenario says, wow, you know what? The Fed did a really great job, better than it's ever done before, and we're going to actually have very smooth sailing for all of 2024. We're going to be returning to normal/high growth rates for GDP. And of course, we've got our two downside scenarios. So we know that something bad can definitely happen. Commercial real estate might collapse next year as a lot of loans become due, or student loan repayments in combination with lower consumer saving might really put a crimp into people's budgets, and they'll stop spending on consumption. So there are some things that might affect the downside scenario. And of course, in the severe downside scenario, who knows? Anything could happen in the severe downside scenario. We could have a housing market collapse. NATO could be drawn into the war, Russia's war in Ukraine. A new pandemic could spread. So, severe downside is reserved for really edge case, bad times scenarios. But we still throw it in there to see what will happen. If we move on to the next slide, something that gives me some hope is that the resiliency of leisure and the fact that the prices for leisure, while they have been increasing, have not been increasing as quickly as inflation, means it's going to be durable even in the face of the downside scenario. And we only really see demand in the negative zone with that severe downside. And we'll see the demand a little bit lower in 2024 than we did in 2023. But otherwise, we've got growth almost assured to happen in demand for the next year. It could be a little bit higher than our baseline. It could be lower than our baseline, but we're by far and away the weight of all of our likelihood is on demand growth, certainly. And moving to the final slide, I believe this is going to show us our revenue projections. What's going to happen to RevPAR? It's probably going to increase. It could increase by as much as 3% in the upside scenario. Our baseline says around 2%, not which is not too shabby. It's better than this year, I should point out, and should be roughly in line with inflation. And of course, with the downside scenario, we have small reduction in RevPAR, smaller than the reduction that we've already seen this year, happily. We do see a significant decrease in revenue in the severe downside scenario, but of course, if the severe downside scenario happens, we'll all have bigger things to worry about than the performance of the short-term rental market. But in any case, that's our idea about the future and some of the things that have informed our outlook.
Great, Bram. Lots of awesome data.
And I've gone over time. I apologize.
You are fine. Thank you. Thank you for all those insights. Grab a sip of coffee or water. And then we do have a few questions that came in. So if anyone can stay on a little past the hour, we have 3 myths that came in. So Bram and Cree, if you could answer these 3 myths to close out our session. Okay. Here is the first myth that was mentioned. Vacation rentals will never be on a destination marketing board. I'm going to throw that to Cree.
Cree, you're on mute. I'm expecting he's going to tell us he already knows a board that has one.
Probably.
Yeah, I think they're already on. I think they're already on. And you know, whether they're on individually, whether it's a large owner or an aggregate, like I said, I think a lot of this legislation, nothing galvanizes a group of stakeholders like pending legislation. And I think you may see vacation rentals. I know boards that I've been in front of boards that are 70% vacation rental because their destination is 70% vacation rental. So will it happen quickly? No, the wheels of law grind slowly, but I cannot foresee a board in cities that tax vacation rentals. I cannot foresee a board that does not have representation from vacation rentals.
And
Great.
and I would say too, wherever I go, I always say that one of the most important things short-term rentals can do is to make sure they're paying those occupancy taxes in the same way that hotels are. That pays into DMO budgets. And I can't think of 2 parties whose interests would be more closely aligned than people that own property locally and are trying to attract people to that area. And of course, a DMO who's receiving some of the tax revenue from the short-term rentals. So they should not naturally be enemies.
Yeah, I don't want to be wrong though. Ping me with an email afterwards if you can think of any that are never going to have vacation rentals on their board. And I'd love to be.
Great. Okay, we have 2 more myths. Here's the next one. I'm going to read this one so I don't skip over anything. So, is it a myth that only full property is a hotel comparable? In other words, people who stay in a hotel room in a host home with the host present, a tent, a camper, etc., are travelers who would have to stay in a hotel otherwise.
Oh my goodness. Did Bala ask this question?
No, curveball from Wendy.
Wow.
I think there's Airbnb. It's very complicated that Airbnb continues to market itself as people staying with other people in the same house, and they will continue to do that because of the community, because of the feel-good branding elements and the community, and the way it positions them as a brand. They've gone on the record and said that they're going to continue promoting that. I would look to Bram, but my strong sense is that the vast overwhelming majority of people who stay in Airbnbs are staying alone.
Yeah, that is true from what I can see from the data. I know that Airbnb in the summer release was really stressing the private rooms. They were trying to reintroduce the idea. And I think one of the reasons for that was it's a way to grow listings without having a housing market, which the U.S. does not seem to currently have. But by far and away, yeah, I think most people are staying in entire homes or apartments. That is, the majority of the lets. But there is room for those private rooms, especially in places where, of course, the regulations demand that is the only type of short-term rental that can be let. I've certainly stayed in one of those in Manhattan. Um, uh, but some short-term rentals can be substitutes for hotels and some cannot. So, it is sort of it depends on on the market. So I hate to give that that answer, but it does very much.
Great, great. And then last myth that we have in, short-term rentals are contributing to disruptions in neighborhood communities. Feelings, images, increases of criminal activities like damaging property, drugs, human trafficking, etc. Is that true or false about the short-term rental market?
Is that perceptions? Are we asking whether that's happening or whether that's perceived to be happening?
Yeah, they are contributing to the disruptions in the communities.
Right. I'd say largely from what I've been able to find, that is false. So there was originally, as I pointed out, originally that was one of the concerns. When short-term rentals and Airbnb really started to grow very quickly, there was disagreement as to whether they were going to lower housing prices or increase the housing prices. Of course, now I think almost everyone is firmly on the side that the effect that they have is going to be positive net. They're just sort of disagreements on the magnitude of that and the reach to which STRs can really affect that. But no, there is not very good evidence at all that there is increased criminality due to short-term rental concentrations. The one result, and I'll have to look up the name of the author of this paper, the one association that they did find is in the special case of the shared room, not a private room, but a shared room. So if you've got a high concentration of short-term rentals where more than one person is staying in the same room, there's a slight increase in property crime associated with that. Meanwhile, if you're not in this situation, people are renting out entire apartments, there's actually a small decrease in property crime. And the idea behind that is that there's just more eyeballs looking out for suspicious activity. So I would say on the whole, there isn't a big effect on crime that we've been able to observe, and that's largely been sort of abandoned as a talking point by those that want to restrict the short-term rental industry.
Great, great. Good insight. Cree, can I get you to switch to the next slide? Which will close out our session today. So on behalf of Cree, Bram, and myself, thank you for everyone joining and listening. On behalf of all the folks back at Arrivalist and AirDNA, we want to wish you very happy holidays and a great start to your 2024. Thank you, TTRA and Sarah, for hosting this webinar with us today. Really appreciate everyone's time.
And thanks for the great questions.
Mm-hmm.